Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 147. Being that today was Teves, the 204th yard site of the Alter Rebbe, the Miyasid of Teves Chassidus Chabad, which without that we would not be here speaking. Let me begin by sharing a few words about Rabbeinu HaGodel. In the language of the Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, Rab Shneur Zalman of Liadi, was a student of the Mezritcher Maggid, who in turn was a student of the Baal Shem Tov, Miyasid Teres Chassidus Chabad. In many places it speaks about the difference between the Baal Shem Tov, Chassidus, Miyasid, the founder of Chassidus in general, and the Alter Rebbe. Sometimes the expression is used that the Baal Shem Tov taught us that every person can serve God. And the Alter Rebbe taught us how every person can serve God. In one Sikha, the Frierdiker Rebbe brings a moshel, an example of this. The Baal Shem Tov provided us with a ladder to climb, and the Alter Rebbe taught us how to climb. So in a sense, you could say they complement each other, obviously. And Tanya Chassidus is Teres HaBaal Shem Tov. He Ata Yismach Yisrael, as it's written in one of the approbations in the beginning of the Tanya, published and printed the beginning of the Sefer of Tanya. Because the Alter Rebbe took the Baal Shem Tov's Torah and the Maggid's Torah and turned it into a methodology, Chassidus Applied methodology, that each of us, no matter what level we're on, can indeed be touched and reach the divine and transform our lives and reach the highest levels of what we call experiencing godliness and becoming one with godliness in our work and Aveda to leading to the Geula. The Geula essentially is really, as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, in Perek Lamed Vov and Lamed Zayin, chapters 36 and 37, that it is the embodiment of Elokus in this world. What that means is embodiment. Let me explain what that means. Manifesting. We live in a world, as he explains there, that the divine is concealed, and we are primarily consumed with, and our natural instincts are toward materialism and material interests and pleasures. And the kavona is dira b'tachtenim, as he explains in chapter 36, in tachtenim, not tachtenim in the linear sense, in a physical sense of physical space, the lowest, but the lowest in divine revelation, or rather I should say in lack of divine revelation. That in this world, where the divine is so concealed, and we can live, the machine is not necessarily in touch consciously with its maker. In a sense, the machine and the engineer of the machine are not necessarily in touch from our perspective. And our job is to realign ourselves and recognize through this concealment, reveal that connection to the point where the existence and the human race and the world is completely aligned with the purpose for which it was created, which is to make this world a home for the divine, a comfortable home. And we do that through our hard work and efforts, through Torah mitzvahs, the study of Torah, the performance of mitzvahs, taking the physical world and using it not for selfish purposes, but for divine purposes. And when that's fulfilled, in the words of Maimonides of Rambam, whose yard site was also just a few days ago, on the 20th of Teves, that in the words of the Rambam at the end of his book, that the entire that the entire business of the world will be nothing but Ladasas Hashem Balvat, to know God. So in this material world, instead of materialism being an end in itself, it'll be a stepping stone, a means toward spiritual enlightenment, and toward knowing and experiencing the divine. And this is what the Alter Rebbe did with his Chassidus. He gave us, starting with Tanya, and then the hundreds of his discourses, provided a full methodology of how to achieve this. Now obviously, it didn't begin with the Alter Rebbe. This is the whole purpose of Torah in general, and all of existence in general, from the beginning of time. But especially in the contemporary age, the last few hundred years, with the new challenges that were faced, so many things that were lost, so to speak, or were somewhat distorted or diluted due to the harsh exile. So the Alter Rebbe created a doctrine by which we can take and distills all the generations of Torah, starting from Torah Shebiksav and Torah Shebal Peh, in all its departments, Pshat, Remez, Drusad, of course Kabbalah, into a system of study and work in how we actually realign or interface existence and the divine. So of course we all owe a great debt, more than a debt. There's no real words to express the power of this type of methodology. And the question that's asked, so how was it done before the Alter Rebbe? As I mentioned, either it was done because we lived in a pure environment and we just had the capacity to just instinctively, due to the pure atmosphere, and pick up how to live that life. Or there was actually the awareness by the few, which is the leaders, who taught the rest. But the Alter Rebbe, recognizing, as the Rebbeim before him, and of course afterwards, recognizing the forces of enlightenment and the forces of assimilation that would be sweeping across the world, and suddenly Judaism was changed, the Jewish world was transformed completely, from a world where everybody was Shema Torah Mitzvahs, except for rare exceptions, to a world where unfortunately assimilation dominates today. The need to articulate that which perhaps earlier did not need to be articulated, the need to express the inexpressible, the need to create a system of being able to compete with the modern world and provide us with real conscious tools of how one can climb this ladder, as I mentioned, not just having the ladder, but climbing the ladder. And indeed, this is hinted to in the Alter Rebbe's name. We know a name captures the essence of the one called by that name. So Shnei Zalman, as explained by a number of by the Rebbeim, as well as by the Rebbe's father and the Rebbe, a number of places, consists of two words, Shnei Eir, two lights, the light of Nigla and the light of Chassidus, is the Balatanya v'Ashulchan Aruch. So both Primus HaTeira, the light of Primus HaTeira, and the light of Nigla the Teira. And Zalman is the words, same letters as Zman, to take the light, these two transformative lights, the transcendent light of Primus HaTeira, the imminent light of Nigla the Teira, and infuse it and to permeate Zman, time as we know it, time and space, which is this world. And that's what the Alter Rebbe came to do, as I said, his name indicates. So on this yahrzeit of the Alter Rebbe, we commemorate and we honor that by committing to learning Chassidus, by living Chassidus, and by acting on it both for ourselves and everyone around us. And therefore, this is also the anniversary of MyLife, Chassidus Applied. We began Chof Teves 2 years ago. This will be the third anniversary. So we're now celebrating the third anniversary. And after the first anniversary, as you may know, to honor it, we launched a new project called the MyLife Chassidus Applied Essay Contest. So I'm excited to share with you that we'll now be launching, as we speak, we're officially launching the third annual MyLife Chassidus Applied Essay Contest. You can go to meaningfullife.com/contest. You'll find all the information you need, and you can begin to submit your essays for this year's contest, with the first prize being, as has been in the last 2 years, $10,000 for the best essay. That will be determined by a very reputable panel of our judges. And the rest of the details you can read there, and all the guidelines. And I always say, follow the guidelines. That's the most important thing. We need to be fair, so we need to have equal guidelines for everybody. This isn't a right and wrong type of essay contest. So it has to come down to criteria of what determines the best essay in this competition. So again, excited to share. We're launching the MyLife Chassidus Applied third annual essay contest, and may the best man or woman win. It's going to be both in English and Hebrew essays, and as well as Yiddish if you'd like to write it in Yiddish. As I said, the details are all there at meaningfullife.com/contest. meaningfullife.com/contest, right. So, that's in honor of Chof Teves, which is, as I said, the yahrzeit of the Alter Rebbe and the founder of Chassidus Chabad. So what better way to honor that is by actually doing our part. And what can I say, in the last 2 years, the essays that have come in, hundreds and hundreds of essays, over 1,000 essays, from different people in different walks of life, taking an idea in Chassidus, applying it to a real life situation. And as I said, the guidelines are there. Basically, it's about taking a maimer or several maimarim, applying it to a given situation, specifically with exercises, with hands-on approach, preferably, and with extra points to cross-reference, and really explain an idea in Chassidus in that fashion. What can I say? As I mentioned, I've seen tremendous, the effort, of course, is tremendous on all people's parts, but many, many essays, excellent essays, food for thought, I believe breakthrough ideas that can actually transform people's lives. And again, I invite everybody. Everybody's welcome to join, and you'll be hearing more announcements about this. but please share it with your friends and take the time. Now is a good time to begin because there's at least, I believe, 4 to 5 weeks until the essays have to be submitted. As I said, the details are, I announce again, meaningfullife.com/contest. Okay. Let us go into a few key questions and some follow-up. Let me begin with a follow-up question, which was regarding the discussion about women in Torah last week. So we received a bunch of questions, a bunch of comments, a bunch of critique as well. And I want to read a few things. I think it speaks for itself. I don't think I can read all the comments because there were so many, but I think a few will suffice. So one person writes, women don't need mitzvahs because they are more special. Is this really the best Rabbi Jacobson can come up with? We were taught this apologetic approach in grade school. It didn't work then and certainly does not work now. It leaves so many unanswered questions, just one of which is the fact that a woman's testimony, with some exceptions, is simply not valid. Is that because in essence she is more special than a man? In response to that, another person writes, is that what you heard? That women don't need mitzvahs because they are special? I listened to what the rabbi said and I heard something very different. That the divine connection for some, men, is an act, a verb, and for others, women, is a state of being. Rabbi Jacobson was basically explaining the words of the Arizal that women embody time, therefore they are exempt from time-related mitzvot. Another person writes, I think us, women, ourselves, should strive to find the answers to these questions because these are for sure not complete answers. As much as I respect this rabbi and many others, we cannot accuse them of saying what they say. We should be strong enough to explore who we really are ourselves and pray to God, and pray God to help us and deliver us. Good luck to us. Another person writes, women are on a higher spiritual level. Women are special. Women embody time. It all sounds so wonderful until you realize that these platitudes simply cover the fact that women are unequal to men in Judaism. I think a little more honesty would be a good place to start. Another person writes, I guess in response to all of these, the first question that needs to be addressed is, do you want to connect to God and you feel slighted, unequal compared to men, or do you simply want equal rights? Men and women are different, full stop. Therefore, we connect to God in uniquely different ways. It's not better or worse. It is simply different. If we take the Torah and its laws at face value, it may seem that women are treated unequally. Then again, if we take the Torah at face value, men would lay tefillin on the bridge of their nose. The Torah places such tremendous value and beauty on the role and responsibility of the Jewish woman. The woman's role of raising a frum family is exponentially more dear than the man's role. It's a real shame that instead of focusing on our own milas and abilities, our own qualities and abilities, we are looking across the room for something else that isn't in line with our innate qualities. Another person writes, women have more understanding to see Parsha about Bnei Tzlofchad, the daughters of Tzlofchad. They have more understanding of God's will. See the story about Zipporah and Moshe's son. They are the real source of change in people. See Bereshis about Chava. They are more in tune, and men must listen. See Vayera about Avram and Sarah. If you want more, I'll be happy to give it. Finally, a person writes, well, I don't know if it's finally, but finally with the one last one I'll read. The problem with tying a woman's significance in God's eyes to raising a family is that it is limited to women in marriages who are fertile and who are of childbearing age. What about women who can't bear children, or women who can't get married, or women whose children have flown the nest? So you have a good, nice cross-section of literally one extreme to the next. And I'll just add the following. Something I said last week, and I say it again. I think you always have to begin with the axioms and the first muskel rishon, the premise. I mentioned the premise, and it surprises me that nobody refers to that. Maybe I just didn't get it across correctly, or it wasn't words from my heart. So I'll try to say it from my heart now. The Torah begins and describes a man and a woman. If we believe in God, and we believe that God created man and woman, and we believe that God created them differently because He wanted them to be different, and they both together were created, the Tzelem Elokim, in the divine image, Zocher Nekeva Barais. So we have to begin with that premise. If you're beginning with a different premise, then you have a whole different approach. If that's the premise, did God create one more equal than the other? Does it make sense? Zoch and Nekev, male and female, He created them, and together they are the Tzelem Elokim. That's unquestionable. That's a biblical verse without any commentary. No rabbis, nothing. Straight from the Torah. I just read to you a verse in the Torah. The first time the human being is mentioned, that's the way the human being is mentioned. With that principle, it's clear that yes, there are two different physiologies, two different biologies, two different personalities, many things that are in common, mind you, but differences that complement each other. And v'hoya lebasar echad, they come together as soulmates, as Chassidus Kabbalah explains, to together complement each other, and only together can they create a family. Can they have children? Can they build something in life? And I mentioned HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'Shechina, they reflect the two divine dimensions, the masculine and the feminine. Nowhere does it say that the masculine dimension of the divine is superior to the feminine dimension of the divine. As a matter of fact, it's ridiculous to state that. They're both divine forces that evolve ultimately in the physical world as masculine and feminine archetypes. I have a whole chapter on this in Women and Men in my book, Torah, Meaningful Life, if you want to read it more in detail. Now, if we agree in that, what I just stated now, then everything flows from there. If you find somewhere it seems that the Torah suggests that a woman is not equal, something's wrong. Either we're not understanding it, or we're not understanding the meaning of the law. I'm not going to go through all the details again, but that's the premise. Frankly, I would say, and this is my own experience, and this I hope everybody takes in the right spirit, I think it has a lot to do with where you come from. If you grew up in an environment, in a home, where one was treated more equal than the other, and a woman was subjugated to her husband, I think you'll probably have that impression and may be very resentful. If you grew up in a home, frankly, the other way around, where the man was subjugated to the woman, many people grow up in that type of environment, they're resentful in that way. Many men are henpecked, whatever word you want to use, because that's where they grew up. They become very passive and very, whatever word you want to use, intimidated by women. And they're women intimidated by men. I think this is human stuff. This is not what the Torah is coming to tell us. This is human conditions. And I think that has a big impact of how we look at it. I grew up in a home, I grew up in an environment, and speaking to women that I'm familiar with will tell you, I never had this issue even. I always felt either equal or felt unique, and I was not looking to be like the man, and the man is not looking to be like the women. So, suggesting that if you grow up in a bittul dika home where both are dedicated to what God wants, Chassidus home, dedicated to the Rebbe's kavanah, dedicated to the kavanah elyena, what we should accomplish, I would submit, growing up in such a home, probably these questions wouldn't even come up. There'd be no need for it, because no one feels suppressed, no one feels discriminated against, no one feels put down. But if you grow up in an environment or a home where it's not that way, obviously these questions are going to come up. Now, I have no problem with the questions, but I think we have to be honest with ourselves, how we look at ourselves. A confident man, a confident woman will have much less issues with this than someone may not be confident. Now, this is not meant to try to suggest that we look at the person who asks the question instead of the question. The question should be looked at its own merit. I'm just suggesting it's another factor. So even though the question has merit, that doesn't mean that the reason we may be disturbed by what we see is not based on some personal experience. And again, I don't want to invalidate the question as a result. But just because you have a personal experience does not take away from the merit of the question. The merit of the question does not take away from the fact that we have personal experiences and subjective ones at that play a role in this factor. The reason I go here is because I see it all the time. I see women who have absolutely no issue with this. Not because they're satisfied with their second-class citizen state. They don't feel like second-class citizens. They don't feel that way. They don't experience it. No way do they relate to it that way. And they feel completely unique, and you would say superior is not the right word, but special in the eyes of God, in the eyes of their husbands, in the eyes of the men in their lives, and so on, in the eyes of other women. So I think this is a vital component that has to be thrown into the equation, especially when you start hearing these diverse opinions back and forth. Once you go with the premise that it's God-given, is God going to give a law that's going to suppress a human being? Does that make any sense? God created us that we should serve God, we should live up to our greatest potential. So it makes absolutely no sense that God would create a situation where someone is subjugated, or someone is second class, or someone is in any way discriminated against. Once you have that principle, the rest will follow. Similar to when you talk about science and religion, where people say there's a contradiction between science and Torah. If you believe that the Torah is a God-given Torah, and you believe that God created the laws of nature, no way that this God, the God that gave the Torah, can contradict the laws of nature that He created. So when we come to a scientific theory that seems to contradict, either we don't understand the Torah and the theory, or the theory may be wrong. So this is the same approach with every given question on this level. Okay, it's a follow-up. Let's go to some new stuff, and then we'll do another follow-up about another topic. So, question: the power of unity. The Rebbe spoke countless times about the power of unity and the impact uniting Jews has on a cosmic level. Can you please shed some light on the power of unity? Another person writes, would you please discuss how exponential results come from uniting together? So first, let's make this clear. Yes, the Rebbe talked about it, just like the Alter Rebbe spoke about things, but this is the basis of Torah. First of all, v'hafta recha kamoicha, zeh klal gadol b'Torah, and zui kol ha'Torah kula, in the words of Hillel. These are the loving another and unity. Achdus, barchenu avinu kulanu ka'echad. The entire Mishnayos ends, Lo motza kodesh baruch hu keli bracha el hashalom. Lo motza kodesh baruch hu keli machzik bracha el hashalom. The Eibusha did not find the keli, a container to contain blessing, only shalom. Shalom is more than unity, it's peace, it's harmony. Unity has tremendous power. You look in the end of Pasha Neich and the Deir HaFlogim. Why did God have to confuse their language? Why don't you just disperse them? Because when people are united, as the Pasuk says there, they're united in language and in intent, even if it's a bad intent, that God, in a sense, bound Himself, that He gives blessings to where there's unity. Rahman al-Litzlan, when the Anshe Avshalom, who were on the wrong side, were fighting the Anshe David's people. So even though David HaMelech was in the right, but since his people were fighting with each other and Avshalom's people were united, God forbid there were nefoshes, there were sacrifices, there were casualties. Unity has bracha even in Klippa, in the Umazeh. Even though it's true, you could say in Klippa Umazeh, in the negative it can't really be true unity, but even as ostensible unity, it has power, and we saw it unfortunately 70 years ago in Nazi Europe. So unity has power because unity invokes the power of Hashem Echad. It's obvious if it's Gedusha, it's a lasting and powerful one. But even Klippa, for the short time that it shows some unity, in some way brings power. On if you want to talk on a psychological level, it's very simple. A house divided cannot stand. Even close people, family, and so on. When you're united, you don't have infighting. You have the synergy that comes from many different opinions, all directed toward one goal. So that's the power of unity. And therefore, unity has many, many implications, many positive consequences. Unity creates strength. The famous moshel in Nitzavim, in the Tanchumen chapter in Nitzavim, where it says, "Atan Nitzavim Mayem Kulchem," you all stand together. And the example given there, and it enumerates all the different categories of Jews. Reshechem Shiftechem, from the leaders, till Teves Shev Memecha, the water carriers and the wood choppers. And the Medrash says that the people are like stalks of wheat. One stalk of wheat is easy to bend and break. But when you put many of them together in a bushel, you can't break it. So it's not the individual, it's the collective energy. I mentioned the synergy, what Chassidus calls the Eir Ha'ela Al Kulona, that creates a collective energy that's more than the sum of the parts. So I can go on and on. We have the expression, Chassidus Fabrengen, Malach Mochol cannot accomplish what a Chassidus Fabrengen, the unity of people sitting together. The example is brought in the Sichos that a parent, a father, when he sees his family together, his children together, then he comes. It gives him the greatest simcha. God forbid the opposite is also true. He can't be present when his family is fighting. It's the most painful thing, which explains why sinas chinam, the opposite of unity, disunity, and baseless hatred, brought about the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. What's the connection? Because how could God rest among us, when we're fighting with each other? A parent can't do that. God cannot tolerate that. And there's no bracha, there's no keli machzik bracha. Kol ha'teira kula le'nitna elo lasa shalom ba'elam, as the Rambam concludes the laws of Hanukkah. The entire Torah was given to bring peace. The list goes on. I'm not going to list every Maimer Chazal. I think you get the point. And as the psychological element, when a person feels united with others, tell me, how much we can accomplish. When we have to invest and expend energy in fighting or defending ourselves, or the tensions involved, you simply can't focus on anything that's positive. And also internally, when we fight with ourselves, when we're splintered, when we are fragmented, when we don't have inner peace. So harmony individually, collectively, on every possible level is the cause for all great things. That doesn't mean there isn't diversity. It's the harmony within diversity. Okay. In Torah, Chassidus, it associates with the number 3. The number 3 is Teves. Chesed is this way. Gvur is on the right. Gvur is on the left. Teves is in the center. It's the harmony within diversity. Yefi, beauty, which is combining different colors in one beautiful, symmetrical harmony. Next question. Is there really meaning? Do menial things have any real significance? We're taught that to make this world a comfortable home for God, even the details, and specifically the details, can't be overlooked. It's the intricacies of halacha done properly that make this world a home. But is no detail too small? Was any detail too small? What about the really minute details like putting our right shoe on first or giving tzedakah with our right hand? Do these seemingly menial instructions really matter to the bigger picture, or do they just give significance to the act itself? Not to sound cliche, but really, thanks from MyLife Chassidus Applied. I learned so much from this series, and I appreciate how you tackle every issue, both how you do it and how no topic is too big or small. What is the significance in dressing the way, how it says, for example, in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch? Am I making a dir b'tachtenim, a home for God in this world, when I first put on my right or left sock? Are these even really mitzvahs, or just the best way for Yidden, for Jews to conduct themselves? Okay. So let's begin. I'll begin with a scientific example, or a simple example everybody can relate to. There's 75 trillion cells in the human body. That's a lot. Trillion. God forbid, one mutant cell can create tremendous havoc. You can write a computer program of millions of lines. You add a dot or missing a dot, one dot, and the whole thing doesn't work. You see this consistently, especially on the microscopic level, that we do not think of size anymore. It's not a question of what's meaningful. So it may be tiny, may be microscopic, may be invisible to the naked eye, but it can cause more problems or create more strength, like nuclear power, than anything we could ever imagine. So in this type of world, I don't think this question is even an issue. Since when? What defines menial? What defines minute? What defines a detail? Is there a detail in the human body that you'd say, oh, it doesn't matter that much? Everything matters. Every move, every fiber, every nerve, every cell. When you speak about it more on a cosmic level, let's put it this way. It says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu shavo mashva kotten v'gadol. He's the all equalizer. In the eyes of God, everything is equal, the big and the small. So think of the number of infinity, the infinite set of numbers in mathematics. Compared to infinity, 1 and a trillion, and zillion, or whatever, how high you want to go, is all equal. That's just the numbers. But according to God, which is even beyond the world of numbers, and beyond any world that we can define, who defines what's big, what's small? I very much remember vividly, Sikha the Rebbe spoke was to the Kinus HaShluchim, Chayesar Tafshin Membov. He spoke the difference between how Chabad Shluchim work and how the rest of the world works. He says, the rest of the world comes into a city. They first do a study, then they create a committee, and then another committee. And from the top down, they try to figure out what to do, solving a problem. A shliach comes to a city. First thing he goes out, he looks for a Jew, an individual. Puts on tefillin with him, suggests to light a candle for Shabbos or Yontif. Detail works from the bottom up. And the Rebbe spoke about the details. That is the way to go. You go from the bottom up. And then expressed himself this way, the Rebbe did, that no detail is too small in the eyes of God. And he even says that when a woman or a father or mother are busy for nemenzich, they're involved with their little child, diapering the child, things that everyone would say there's no big glamour involved and no glitz, and you're not going to get awards, and it's not going to be on television, it's no fireworks. Nothing fancy. The little detail. He says, in them liegt atzmus mahus. Atzmus mahus is the reserve for the essence of the divine. Because God decided every detail matters. So to say we live in a world of 7 billion people, who really cares how I behave? Doesn't work that way. In a numbers game, perhaps in business, it's a numbers thing. More numbers. But in the eyes of God, and I said before, the examples in nature and in science and so on, we see this also in the human body and nature and so on. There's no such thing as a detail that's too small. So the fact that in our eyes it may not look significant, but in God's eyes it looks significant. And one cell can change everything. As the Rambam says, Ma'aseh echad, we should look at the whole world as an equal scale, a balanced scale. One action can bring tshuva v'atzola to the entire world, can bring redemption and salvation to everyone, to you and to the entire world. So that's the power of a detail. And yes, details matter, and it's all in details. That doesn't mean that there aren't priorities when you have to make choices. We make choices. And there are rules for these choices as well. But you'd be surprised how the detail sometimes is the priority over the collective. Because at the end of the day, the collective is made up of details. And if we're not going to focus on the detail, we can end up destroying, God forbid, and damaging and compromising the collective whole. Right. The Rebbe brings a number of places. I mean, it's a sad example, but it's still a good example, that when they surround the city, enemies surround the city, and they say, give us one person from among you, or else we'll kill you all. You're not allowed to even choose one. 10,000 people. One person, you'll save everybody else. You're not allowed to choose an individual, because we do not know, the value of life is not in numbers. That's the extent of the power of a yochid and an individual. And the same thing with every detail in our lives. Okay. Next question. What is the Rebbe's position on public policy? There's a local state representative in her youth received a bracha and dala from the Rebbe. She would like to read the Rebbe's positions regarding public policy. I would appreciate any help you can give me. Thank you. So firstly, yes, in my book, Torah Meaningful Life, I actually gathered a few chapters that very much talk about public policy, and I would suggest chapter on education, chapter on government, on responsibility, on, those three are our generation. Those four I would suggest. Briefly, the Rebbe's approach to public policy is simply this, and you hear it in many Farbrengens, especially when public officials would come to the Farbrengen, which of course is appropriate to the fact that we just inaugurated the 45th President of the United States. And that is, it's all about fulfilling your public responsibility to the public, which is to fulfill what God wants of you. And what is that? To create a civilized world. So all public policy is based not on economic benefits. Obviously, that's a detail and part of it. But above all, to create the environment and the climate that people live up to the moral and ethical responsibilities of the 7 Noahide laws, which really are the 7 universal laws of decent, civilized life. And that's what a person in a public position has the ability to do. And that, of course, includes the education and the standards in education, the protection of individual rights, social services in areas of health, in areas of financial opportunity, and above all, areas of equality that people can really not be discriminated against, but live up to their great potential, as the declaration of this great country, the Declaration of Independence states, that all men are created equal, all people are created equal, endowed with inalienable rights. This is very general. More specifically, I would suggest to look at those chapters. And the Rebbe speaks strongly, of course, the emphasis on education, teaching children not just knowledge and data and information, but that there's an eye that sees and an ear that hears. Accountability, that we're responsible to a higher order, we're responsible to a higher voice and a higher standard. That's the essence of it. And of course, the details, I suggested those places to read, which have many more specifics. Okay, next question. Next question is, how should we deal with accused abusers? Yeah, well, this is a topic I've addressed, especially in the earlier episodes, and I'll refer them to you in a moment. But the question is like this: how should one react toward news that an admired rabbi, who's no longer alive, might have acted inappropriately with people of the other gender? Is it really possible to separate a person's positive accomplishments from their misbehavior? Another way a person writes it: I was positively influenced by someone who turned out to be a violator. How do I deal with that? And I'll read a few more questions in this regard. Always painful, but unfortunately still real. Hello, Rabbi Jacobson. I love your podcasts. They've been a great help to me. My question is a bit sensitive, as I don't want to name names, so I'll try to write it as vaguely as possible. When I was a young person, I met a rabbi who had a huge positive impact on me. Many years later, after he passed away, he was accused by a number of women of having acted inappropriately with them. Hearing of such accusations cannot help but dampen some of my enthusiasm for him, and yet his positive impact on my life and the lives of many others is undeniable. So now I guess I have a form of cognitive dissonance, because I feel enthusiastic about him and continue to study his teachings, but I also feel that there might have been something to the accusations going by the common sense principle of where there's smoke, there's fire. In that case, I feel that perhaps I should be putting my attention elsewhere. What mental attitude does the Torah say I should adopt in such a predicament? Thank you in advance for your wisdom and insight. Another related question: what is the Torah's approach to dealing with an accused abuser? How should this friend's community act towards him? Hi, Rabbi Jacobson. Thank you for your weekly informative class. I really appreciate it. I was wondering, what is the Torah approach to dealing with men who would appropriately have touched others, especially when married? And why did Hashem make them such low some of them such low animalistic strong drive from such a young age? And he goes on a little more explicit than I want to read, but you get the gist. Now, first let me refer you to episodes where I've discussed this topic, somewhat related, and these are episodes we did this for 55 through 60. You could see all these archived episodes at meaningfullife.com/MyLife. As a matter of fact, when you click on the video and you click on the YouTube link, they're actually timestamped, so you don't have to listen to the whole hour or hour and 10 minutes. And the timestamp meaning that you can go to this titled, and the title has a link that takes you straight to that place just with one click. So episodes 55 to 60 and episodes 136 and 137, I address this. So whatever I say complements the things I've said there, and I'll add a few more points. Well, we have a story in the Talmud that is not exactly similar, but a similar question was posed to Rab Meir. His great teacher was none other than a man called Acher. Why would someone be called by the name Acher, the other? Very derogatory and very negative way of naming someone. And that's because this man called Rabbi Elisha ben Avuya was one of the four that went into the Pardes, which is that spiritual experience. It's Rabbi Akiva, the only one coming out intact, and the other three coming out quite scathed. One died, one went insane, and one became an apostate, Elisha ben Avuya. The Talmud tells other stories about him, where basically he lost his faith. Great sage, tremendous sage. And it's a long story, I'm not going to go through all the details. But Rab Meir remained his student before he was a student and later, to the point the Talmud tells the story. It was one Shabbos, and Rab Meir went to study with him. But he was riding on his horse. And Rab Meir walked by this side as he was teaching him Torah. Listen to this. As they're going, and they're walking, and suddenly Acher, Elisha ben Avuya, stops his horse and tells Rab Meir, we've come to the Tchum Shabbos, Alpayim Amma, 2,000 cubits, which means you can't walk further. Your man riding on his horse on Shabbos, and he's telling his student, you've reached, you can't go further. So Rab Meir says to him, why don't you come back with me? He says, for me it's too late. We're not going to go into the discussion about we could have done tshuva, did do tshuva, and all that comes with that. That could be for another time. So later he was asked, Rab Meir, by others, what is this behavior? How could you be learning from a teacher like that? And he gave the classic example. Pri echel v'klipase zerik. I eat the fruit and I throw away the peels. Rav Elisha ben Avuya had great qualities, a great teacher, and as such, I'm taking the benefit from it. And the peels, meaning the stuff that was inappropriate, the stuff that he was not, whatever the reasons were, we're not getting into the reasons, that I discard. Now I know, before I even go on, let me just say this before people raise their hands in alarm. I'm not comparing, God forbid, anyone to Elisha ben Avuya, who's a great neshama, and we're not here to compare. I'm just trying to derive a lesson. And since there are no names mentioned here, I'm assuming that you learned something positive from this and this rabbi. Some people will attribute certain rabbis that's how I did tshuva, and they came back to Yiddishkeit, Shem Torah mitzvahs. And that's undoubtable. That's undeniable. And yet you find out that there are things about the person that are not very admirable. As a matter of fact, had you known that before, you may never even studied with him. So how are you supposed to look at this? To discard the benefits that you gain from it is basically discarding in a way divine providence. You didn't know better. You did gain. The person's not, no one's totally evil. This doesn't justify his other stuff. But we have to learn how to take the fruit and discard the peels. This is not overlooking the peels. This doesn't mean, if he was still here now, I'll still go study with him, even though he's doing something wrong. That may not be the case. With Rab Meir and Elisha ben Avuya, that was the case, and that is maybe a different discussion. But if you did find out that the person is alive, you could even confront the person, and you may not want to study anymore with him. But that doesn't take away anything that you did benefit in the past. And this is about a discussion we've had once more at length at this forum, the idea of growing through our pasts. Forget about a teacher. What happens if you did something really inappropriate? People discovered God, not necessarily in holy ways, through foreign substances and other things. So what do you do now? You can't change the past. What you do is, you take the positive experience, which is called tshuva. The Gemara says this about one of the Tanoim who went, unfortunately, to an inappropriate place and ultimately ended up marrying the woman. So it says Matzoy is the pillows that she offered him in sin, she's now offering him in Kedusha. There's a thing called doing tshuva. Tshuva means Zdeinas Naslech Izachias, which means the Zdeinas, the sins, the deliberate sins are transformed into merits. What does that mean? So it says, Shvirosan Zui Takanosan. You don't transform the sin. The spark that was embedded and trapped within is free. That's what's transformed, as he explains in Tanya chapter 7. And the actual experience, that you discard. Not only discard, you destroy. You destroy it, and that's its repair. So we're not talking about continuing to hold on to that. You take out the spark, the fruit, and the peels you destroy. So the same attitude can be applied without justifying, without trying to defend. Person is a criminal, is a criminal, is a violator, is a violator. But you may have received benefit from that person. Spark. That spark is absolutely holy, and you should embrace it and thank God that God sent that person to you to be able to give it to you. Is it easy to do? Sometimes it's hard, emotionally and psychologically, to separate between the person and what you gain from them. But that's the general Torah attitude, and that's what we have to work on. And it's true across the board, as I just mentioned. There are many things in life where we began doing something, as a matter of fact, not proper, and then the day you do tshuva, and you redeem and free the trapped spark, and yet you discard and destroy the rest of it. That's an example for this same idea. I'm not talking about destroying anyone, but people have to be accountable. And just because, and now the real truth is, we should all know, there's no tzaddik on earth that doesn't have some flaw. So to suggest I'm only going to learn from people who are perfect, that's just simply not realistic. Now, of course, we understand there's imperfect and there's imperfect. We're, of course, talking about situations which are quite horrendous. Not just somebody who by mistake or we all have our shortcomings. So I understand the distinction. My point, however, is that we need to make this type of the separation, fruit and peels. Now, how to deal with abuse, which is another story. Listen, we've talked about this matter. Anyone that is a danger to other people, whether it's physical danger, whether it's sexual danger, whether it's psychological or emotional, has in some ways the law of a redif. A redif is someone who's pursuing someone with a knife, with a weapon, and you have to do whatever it takes to stop that person. So that's not even a question. The question is, someone was accused of abuse years ago, and it's very clear that today that's not, they're completely not, well, completely, they're not doing it. There you need investigation because you need to determine what the case is, and that's not for the scope of this discussion. That I refer you back to what I discussed back then. But there's no question that the Torah does not in any way condone covering up or in any way, God forbid, allowing a situation where anyone can be in danger. And thank God, people are getting clearer and wiser about it. Still not perfect, but I just want to address that in that context. Okay. So, next question. How to talk effectively. Well, here's the question. Let me voice. How can I effectively talk to my son about his natural attraction to the opposite gender? Okay. So that flows straight from the previous topic. Well, not really. I should correct myself because it's not abuse. That's the natural way God created us, that we are attracted to the opposite gender. As I mentioned before, Zachar Nekeva Boresim. The only common denominator is we're dealing with something in the sexual arena. But I want to make it very clear this is a healthy question, and that's an unhealthy one. The famous joke where a guy comes to the rabbi and says, "My rabbi, what should I do? My son is dancing with Gentile women and eating pork." So he said, he went crazy. So the rabbi said he didn't go crazy. He would go crazy if he was dancing with pork and consuming Gentile women. So we have to understand there's a natural way that God created that we have attraction. So the question is, what is the Torah perspective on chinuch for boys when they reach puberty and beyond? Without guidance from safe sources, young boys can easily be misinformed and worried about their growing attraction toward the opposite gender. How can a parent talk to their child about this so they can develop a healthy and normal outlook? So this too is a question I addressed back when. I see I don't have here which episodes. I'll give it to you next week. I'll have my assistant to help me find that. And a few other ways people address this question. Another person writes, my brother, who has just entered Masifta this year, was caught drilling a large hole and doing something that was not appropriate. Another brother of mine also did something inappropriate. I don't want to read all the details here, obviously. Anyway, I'm wondering what would Hashem do to these young boys? How can we prevent this? My parents have talked to my brother last year so openly about reaching this age, the hormones, and about focusing, doing the right thing. What do we do? Do we speak openly? Do we not say anything? Is there a way to effectively educate boys to channel these feelings? I'm sure this is a new thing, and it goes back even to the time of the Gemara. How does the Torah deal with these issues? I do hope you will address this soon, as we are currently in this situation with my brother, and would appreciate Torah advice. Thank you. Well, as I always point out, to the frustration of some of you, there's no black and white answer to these questions because every case is different. Every person, every brother, every young man, young woman has to be addressed on their terms and to understand where they're at. If you try to give platitude or general answers, they usually don't work. But that doesn't mean I can't suggest some guidelines based on the Rebbe's sichos, based on the Rebbe's approach, based on Teves, Chassidus, and so on. And again, I say there are previous episodes that early on where I discussed this more at length, which I said I'll give you those episodes the next week, the following week. Briefly put is this: there's preventive, and there's dealing with situation once you're already in the throes or in the thick of a problem. Preventive, of course, is the best way. Preventive includes many factors. Firstly, the environment and the home people live in. Never underestimate. I know parents sometimes say it's not us at all, it's the children, it's other things going on. Parents always have an impact. So I have no other way of saying it, but saying it, your own sexuality as adults and as parents, and your attitudes to it, maybe need to review. And before you bring children in this world, not as a condition, we should all bring children in this world, but I mean, when you're still young parents, maybe it's time to talk to a mashpia, or to a guide, or to someone who knows the Torah approach, and really review what is your personal attitude to sexuality. I know it sounds strange to you that you think you have it all figured out, but no one has it figured out. It could be we ourselves are projecting, or not creating the right tone and environment that should be created in our holy and sacred homes. So that's the first thing every parent must do. So besides providing for your children's physical needs, you have to also provide for their emotional needs. And yes, for the right taras mishpacha isn't just mikveh and the laws between husband and wife, it's taras mishpacha, family purity, creating a pure and sacred home. So that definitely all of us should go and check up. The worst thing you find out, you're doing everything perfect. Or you may find out there are things you can improve. So that's one thing in the preventive. Secondly, in the preventive is the way we carry ourselves, and when our children start growing, how we talk about things. Sacred environment doesn't just mean you talk about sexuality. It's everything. Your life is a sacred place. The Rebbe spoke about television as being an avodah zarah to bring into one's home. So you could say, what's the big thing? But look on television, it creates plenty of imagery that's not necessarily conducive to bringing up a healthy, emotionally, psychologically, and sexually balanced human being. So what are we exposing our children to? I understand people say, I don't let them watch pornography. But today it's out there, what some people may call pornography, others may not call it, but there's a certain promiscuity, a certain laxity around sanctity, around intimacy, around sexuality. And we must create the proper environments. I'm speaking now outside of the parents themselves, and make sure that our children grow up in the best possible chance. And then there's what we speak to our children. You say Moida Ani with your child in the morning. You say Biyot Chavkid Ruchi and Krishma at night, davening, after they come home from school. You may say, well, what does that have to do with it? The more you pay attention to the child, like a flower, the more you nurture it, the more you water it, the healthier it grows. So it may even be preventive of having to have a direct conversation, because you're creating the environment that's a sacred one. And again, I say this is a hard thing to swallow. You have to look at yourself. You may think you're doing everything right, and you may not be doing everything right. Now, I'm not suggesting all the above does not mean there aren't risks, and it's all guarantee. I'm just suggesting that we begin with the preventive in that fashion. And then when a child comes of age, and they begin asking questions, or you begin to talk about, there are very subtle and tzniusdik and modest ways to talk about the sanctity of the human body, that God blessed us with the gift of a body, without necessarily talking about negative. So much about sexuality is associated, people will tell you, it was this big secret, it was ugly, shame, guilt. Maybe it's time to talk about the sanctity of the human body, from head to toe. And yes, the sanctity of our intimate parts as well, without explicit language. Just the idea, God gave us the ability to bring children into this world. And God gave us gifts that have to be protected, because we live in a world that can be selfish. And there are many ways to phrase it and voice it that can be voiced in ways that are extremely modest and tzniusdik without getting into being provocative, but doing it in a very subtle fashion. That is, as I said, l'chatchila, the best approach to take. As far as once a situation arises like you're describing here, so this requires far more detailed intervention, knowing the situation. What brought on the situation? What's bringing it on? And helping a person, yes, harness and redirect them. And often, if it's happening at home, it could be the home itself is not necessarily the best place to solve the problem, because that's where it's happening. You have to wonder why. Now, I understand people bring stuff from outside the home, but this has to be looked at, frankly, from a holistic and a more comprehensive perspective, because I can't give you one piece of advice. I will say the following: bring in fresh air. Bring a mashpia in, bring a wise person into the situation, tell them everything, let them observe, let them talk to the children if necessary, the boys, in nice and gentle ways before coming to a conclusion how to approach it. Should the child maybe be sent to another school? Should the child, what kind of friends? Maybe there's something really bothering them. They need to talk through. They won't talk to their parents and siblings. I mean, there's a whole list of things. It's impossible for me to go through all of them. But if you really want to do something, don't keep doing what you're doing till now, because that's clearly not solving the problem. You have to bring in a fresh set of eyes, a fresh air, some fresh approach. That's what Torah says. Talk to Mashpia, talk to Arav, and get a fresh approach of what to do in the situation. You're going to need someone to talk to these boys, there's no question about it, and figure out what to do. More than that, I don't know what to say, because if I suggest that you go talk to them, you may be saying all the wrong things, so that's why I don't want to suggest that. Okay. Now, we actually have some more follow-ups, but time is limited, so I'm going to move straight to the Chassidus question and leave the two other questions about the vaccines and his marriage a problem solver for next week. Okay. So the Chassidus question is actually part 2 to what we discussed last week, which is what is the Reshimu and what are its implications in our lives, part 2. So let me continue where I left off and see this as a continuation. If you haven't heard the first part, just go back to last week's episode 146 and look up what I discussed there. Okay. I'll get my documents here together properly and fine. So Reshimu, as I said then, and I'll just sum it up briefly and continue, literally means impression, like a reshima of something, like you say, I have a reshim. Like you saw something and it left an impact on you. So it can be impact, but in this case it's more of an impression or a residue I mentioned, or trace. These are all legitimate translations, but the truth is it needs to be explained because it's not a word that really captures it. And what is it, Reshimu? As we cited from the Torah, both in the MyLife and in microcosm Beitzos Chaim, the end of the healthiest of Vayikra, and I'll also mention as Shapseses Tishmeru the beer in the Torah in Bahar, that says there, he says that in Eitz Chaim there's only a hint to it. In Eitz Chaim he says the word, but you don't find in the Kisvei Arizal from the Rachav, Rav Chaim Vital, much about the Reshimu. But you do find it in the Kabbalah of Yisrael Sarug, namely in Aimek HaMelech, a student of his student, where in Shar Shashuya HaMelech and Shar Avirishin, in the early Sha'arim, the early gates of the early part of the Sefer Aimek HaMelech, this is discussed in Reshimu. Now, speaking about it in simple English, Reshimu means that after the concealment, the total and utter tzimtzum b'derech siluk, not kipshute, a concealment, it wasn't total concealment, something was left. Some impression was left. Now we have to really discuss this impression in the context of like an evolution of understanding this Reshimu. Because even when you look in Chassidus, you see in the Torah that I just mentioned, the end of Esophagus to Vayikra, he begins by speaking about the Reshimu as an impression, and he actually gives an analogy for it. The analogy he gives for the tzimtzum, first let's start with the analogy of the tzimtzum. Tzimtzum is the analogy he gives is of a person who's studying in depth a Talmudic tractate, and then he stops studying it, and he goes to study a different tractate. What happens to the knowledge that he gained? So consciously, he's not aware of it. But as soon as you ask him something he learned, let's say Masechta Shabbos, or I think he gives the other example, Masechta Berachos, he'll right away know what you're talking about. Because he didn't forget it, it just embedded in his mind. So he says that's example for the tzimtzum. That now he's not be'idn, he's not longer discussing this, he's not studying it. So he's moved to another thing, but it's there. So from his perspective, from the teacher's perspective, it didn't disappear. From the student's perspective, obviously right now it's not being studied, and even he himself, in a certain way, is not conscious of it until you elicit that. That's the tzimtzum. Then he says, what about analogy for the Reshimu? The Reshimu, he gives also analogy of study. He gives the example as once you finish studying something, you study it in depth with all the reasons, then you only are addressing right now the halachas of it. Like what is the result, the final legal ruling based on this profound and in-depth research and analysis that you learned in the Gemara. So now you're only getting just a derech tzara, a short version of another idea. So from the perspective of an outsider, when he sees the short version, he may not really see all the depth. But from the perspective of the person who learned it all, and he's now summing it up, or he's just learning the so-called the Reshimu that's left over in the context of this brief summary, whether it's in the halachas, the laws, or whatever that come out of this particular in-depth study. So he, from his perspective, it's still there, except on the outside, you only see this impression. That's the analogy given in the Torah, with the Tzemach Tzedek adding some details to it. So you see from these both examples, the key thing to understand from the perspective of our understanding is this, that God wanted a relationship with us. But to have a relationship with another reality, another entity that has independent consciousness, God's divine consciousness had to be concealed from our perspective. There's no real concealment from God's perspective because everything remains intact. But it's like the teacher who becomes silent so the student can emerge. If the teacher will continue to flow, his superior consciousness will not leave room, space for something else. So you need a chol l'mokim panis. Lo yoyim mokim la'amidus elemus. So you need a chol l'mokim pani. But that's one aspect. But there's something. But that would leave, even if it's only a concealment, not simson kipshute, it still leaves the element of silence, of total silence. Say God didn't do it. He left some impression, an impression which is like the summary of what was there before the tzimtzum. So it's a Reshimu from before the tzimtzum. Then will come a kav that will create this revelation within the consciousness of existence. So the Reshimu, in a way, helps us understand Achdus Hashem in a very profound way. It means even with the concealment, something still remains in existence. Because in a way, if there was no Reshimu, think of the situation, there was no impression, just this black hole. Yes, not only concealment. It's not a true siluk. It's not a kipshute. It's not a literal tzimtzum. But from the perspective of the student, it would be utter silence. Here, at least, you're left with something, some residue, some impression, some trace, some handle to hold on and have an experience of the divine on the divine terms. It's still in a concealed state. Because what can we figure out from just that summary? From the divine perspective, it's a summary of all the depth that was there before the tzimtzum. Okay, this is how it's explained in Likutei Torah briefly. However, when you start looking at the Maimorim that continue from there, you'll see in Likutei Torah Bahar, he gives another analogy of someone who learns the words of Teves. So you only see the words. Someone who doesn't have seichel may not understand what these words mean. Someone who has seichel can see in these words the depth of what the Balei Teves meant when they wrote it. So it's somewhat similar. You could probably create distinction, but it's the same idea. This, of course, goes into the point as the Reshimu evolves, and I say the word evolves in its understanding. So if you just had the Eitz Chaim, the Eitz Chaim, you'd only know about this element of this Reshimu. The Emek HaMelech develops this and explains the Reshimu's Asius. It's letters. And Chassidus begins to elaborate. What letters? How do you suddenly letters? There's the letters of Teves. These are letters of the Asius are from before the Tzimtzum. Except they're completely non-tangible and non-existent in any way, but they're nevertheless there. The example given, like letters of thought. You're immersed deep in thought, you don't sense any letters. Or like someone reading a book, you're so immersed you don't even feel the words. But there's still letters. Obviously, before the Tzimtzum, we have to qualify, like he makes it clear in these Maimorim, that it can't be literal in any sense. It's just in order to shachach ha'sa'ezim, meaning in order for us to be able to communicate, we have to give some example. But the letters are completely submerged. The tzimtzum, so-called, diminished and concealed the energy within the letters. So suddenly you have, think of a film and white light. When the white light is shining through the film and it's so powerful, you may not even see the letters. You dim the light, the letters begin to emerge. But then you have only letters. What do they mean? So though, from the perspective of the teacher, from the perspective of Lifnei Tzimtzum, the Asius, you retain everything, but from the perspective of the recipient, all they have now is these letters. Then Chassidus further develops this and explains these letters are let me finish with the Reish Lamed Aleph Sha'arim, the letters of the Reish Lamed Aleph Sha'arim, cited in the end of chapter 1 in Shari Yichud V'Amunah. Just an aside, since people want to know what that is, what's the 231 gates? Well, it's actually 426 different ways of combining. If you think of the letters of Aleph Beis, there's 22 letters. So if you combine two letters like Aleph and Lamed, Beis and Chof, Aleph and Lamed, Beis and Mem, and so on and so forth, you have 22 letters times 21 different combinations. This adds up to 462. But if you think about it, Aleph Beis, Beis Aleph, that's Panim V'Ocher, whether it goes Aleph Beis, Beis Aleph. That's why it says Reish Lamed Aleph, 231 is half of 462, because he's only talking about either the Aleph Beis would be 231, another 231 the other way around. Just as an aside. These are all the letters that everything will come from these letters, as he explains at length in Shar Yuchid V'Amunah. Where do these letters originate? They originate in the Etzem HaNefesh, or it is in L'mayla, Lifnei HaTzimtzum. But Lifnei HaTzimtzum, they're completely not just dissolved, not just subjugated. They don't even exist. You can think of them potential letters. When the Eir, the infinite light before the Tzimtzum is concealed, so the Tzimtzum conceals the light. We're talking about the levels of light that so-called fill this space that would become existence, and what remains is just the letters. So now, and again, as I explained, what's the point of these letters? The point of the letters is to give something a handle. Even after the Tzimtzum, you are able to hold on to something that's pre-Tzimtzum reality. Even though the Kav also comes from before the Tzimtzum, but the Kav is at the end of the day, is a hefsek. It was not like the light just left the Kav. It says clearly in Eitz Chaim, everything had to be concealed, and then comes a Kav. The Reshimu, there's no hefsek. The Reshimu is a extension of, yes, in a concealed way, but it's an extension of pre-Tzimtzum reality. That's the whole purpose of the Reshimu. Then it says in some places that the Reshimu is the Koyach HaGvul, which of course is consistent with the letters. The Koyach HaGvul Shebein Sef, which really explains what these letters are like. What's the Koyach HaGvul? It means the power of the finite. Now, as Chassidus explains, the power of the finite and the power of the infinite is both God's infinite power. It's a power to go without limits, and there's a power to limit his flow. From that perspective, it's not a limit, it's only the power to limit. Now, I should distinguish, this is not the Eir HaGvul, this is the Koyach HaGvul, as he explains in chapter 11, I believe, in Hamshech Ayin Beis. Let me make sure. I don't think so. No, it's not chapter 11. A little further, sorry. Chapter 11, he begins talking about it. Chapter 16 in Ayin Beis. So, Eir HaGvul is that the energy itself has an element of parameters. Different opinions, whether it's actual parameters or it's parameters that will be defined when it comes into the containers. But now we're talking about Koyach HaGvul, the power to actually create parameters. And that Koyach HaGvul is the Sheirish HaKelim. So now we're talking about the Reshimu as the root of the containers, the root of the parameters of the structure of existence. And that, you would think, only emerges after the Tzimtzum. It does emerge, but it's rooted before the Tzimtzum. So paradoxically, the Kav, which is the ray of light that brings energy and revelation in the world, that goes through a hefsek, so to speak, a pause, has a stop. The Sheirish HaKelim, the Asius, remains, a Reshimu remains from before the Tzimtzum. Which of course leads us to the next step. What happens to the Reshimu? Did it undergo a Tzimtzum? And this I'll have to leave for part 3, because this is going to go into the discussion of the Rebbe Marash's Chiddush. So I wanted to just explain so far, and we'll talk more about this, how this continues to develop. Chassidus, literally, you can see with the Reshimu how a Nekudah that was first in Eitz Chaim, Eitz Chaim is just brought briefly, and the Emek HaMelech, which also comes from the Arizal, discusses the Asius. L'Kutei Torah explains it. But then, as we'll see, the Mittel Rebbe brings new analogies, because he says the analogy in the L'Kutei Torah is a limited analogy. It's only for one dimension. We need more analogies. How the Tzemach Tzedek adds to it, how the Rebbe Marash adds to it, how the Rebbe Rashab, and all the Rabbeim add to it. So we're going to go through this in the next few weeks, try to give a thorough take on Reshimu. But to leave just one point, a key point that I want to leave you with is this. As I brought the Sikha from Truma Tov Shin Mem Vov, when the Rebbe spoke about this, that the Reshimu, that the Tzimtzum in Aveda is the idea of Nafshi Karfala Keil Lakel, that you take your being, even your holy being, like Eir Ein Sof within you, and you put it completely, you conceal it, a complete bittul, complete humility, complete suspension of self. B'derech siluk, not kipshute, but derech siluk, but complete. The Reshimu counters that by saying that it's not complete bittul. Because complete bittul would basically mean the annihilation of the ego and the being. The fact that the Reshimu remains, and lo noga bar tzimtzum, as we shall discuss, that the tzimtzum does not affect it, and we'll discuss what that means in the coming episodes, is the Aveda, he says there, of v'yisalcha b'rechova, v'yigba libei b'darkei Hashem, that you have to stand with pride, not to be on a skupa and a dresses, which means a doormat, but you need to have a sense of self. How would there be a sense of self if there was no Reshimu? So the Reshimu says that even if it's a tzimtzum and everything is concealed of the light, something remains, and that something gives substance to our ability to exist from pre-tzimtzum perspective as well. That's the whole point. Because if the tzimtzum affects also the Reshimu, then ultimately the self really is going to be compromised. And we want the self to be part of the process. Adira b'tachtenim, neshama b'guf. The Shittas Haramban, neshamas b'gufim, will be the ultimate reward. More to come in elaborating on this in the next episode. Let us do the three essays, and with that we shall conclude. So the three essays for this week are, number one, A Journey of a Prince by Yossi Fisher, age 20, RCA Tem Chitmim in Morristown, Monsey, New York. So, he uses the mashal of the Ben Melech, the prince, classic mashal given, the analogy given, but he uses one particular version of it, beautifully written, well written, about a prince sent away from his palace, from the king's palace, with a purpose. And he forgets what his purpose is, and he uses this analogy, obviously, to explain the soul's journey from heaven to earth into this world. Very well done, using this analogy. It's a short essay, but based on a sikha from the Rebbe of Shabbos Bereishis Tavshin Yutes, and Chanukah Tavshin Lamed Hey. Mitzvah Shabbos Chanukah Tavshin Lamed Hey. So that's what this does, and it speaks about this analogy. Essay number 2, Folly, the Illness and the Cure. This is by Rivka El-Kaim, age 65, Bell Harbor, Florida. Using the first mimer of the Rebbe Basel Lagani is not only a sequel to the Friedrich Rebbe's mimer, but a mission statement containing the goal of the Rebbe's leadership, going through the seventh generation from the Alter Rebbe. The theme of both discourses is the mission of our times, which is to make a home for God in this world. And this essay focuses on that mission, and goes through the details, also well done, taking concepts from the mimer Basel Lagani, implementing it, and then translating into practical examples in life. Someone pressed for time, someone strongly attached to money, the Teves and basic instincts and sensual thoughts people have, dealing with arrogance, and someone who enjoys speaking, and how to transform all that into serving God. Well done, well annotated. Next essay, the final third essay this week, Of Mountains and Valleys by Shneur Zalman Rabin, age 34, base Rivka Academy, Development Officer, Montreal, Canada. And this essay will focus on the lessons that Chassidus derives from Har Sinai. He takes Sinai, the paradox, on one hand it's a mountain, on the other hand it's the shortest of mountains, the lowest of mountains, and teaches the balance between dignity, self-esteem, pride, and humility, which in a way is like the Kav and the Reshimu that we spoke about earlier. And he discusses the issue, the challenges involved, how do you balance that, mountains and valleys, and comes away with a conclusion and methodologies about being humble and being proud, how to channel pride, recognize the privilege that I have to participate in this unique contribution that each of us makes, even when we're proud of it. So with that, we have the essays. With that, I shall conclude episode 147 of MyLife Chassidus Applied, again announcing the launch of our third annual MyLife Chassidus Applied essay contest. And please participate. You have the time. Go for it. Everyone is capable of winning. Go to meaningfullife.com /contest for details. So until next Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m., everyone be well, very blessed. Chodesh Shvat, which will be next Shabbos, and a blessed year, and all in good health. Tev Hanira v'Hanigla.